This is Brandon at Tailwater Fly Shop, and today we're tying the mud bug. So the hook we're using today is an Umpqua backcountry in a size 1. And we're going to start our thread right at the eye of the hook. And I'm going to make about 10 or 11 wraps back, just to make sure I get my eyes in the right place every time. We're going to use presentation eyes in a size small, plain lead. And I'm going to secure these to the top of the hook. We're going to cover these up with brush, but I'm going to put a pretty generous amount of thread on these just to make sure they get good and secure. I'm not the biggest fan of gluing my eyes down, so just going to make sure we get a bunch of good thread wraps on here. Yeah, that's good. Then we're going to wrap back to just past the point of the hook, about right where that hook shank starts to bend. And we're going to tie in our tail, which is large northern bucktail in the root beer color. And this tail is really going to act as like a kind of some structure for the fly, so you really don't need much. Like, this is probably about as much as I would go, and I'm even going to peel some of these short hairs out of here, because you just want to give that brush that we're going to use here in a second something to grab onto. And I'm going to put this back about maybe 1.5 times the length of the hook. And once you get that secured on the hook shank, we'll trim out our excess. I'm just going to take a couple of wraps behind the bucktail just to prop that up some too. There we go. We want that going straight out the back of the hook like that. So our next material is the Fairflies 5D brush. And this is a new brush that we just got into the shop, so we've been trying to figure out how to tie with this. This is pretty cool stuff. So what you're going to find with this brush is that it's made out of wire that is, I believe it's 3 times as thick as what you're probably accustomed to with any of our other brushes that we have in the shop. You can actually kind of see some of that excess right there. It's pretty thick stuff. So this is there's only one brush in the package, but this is going to last you a very, very long time. You really don't need to use very much of this for a single fly. So we're going to get this ready here, trim off some of our excess wire with our flush cutters. You definitely want some flush cutters when you're using these brushes, because these things will tear your scissors up in a heartbeat. So go ahead and invest in a good pair of flush cutters when you pick up some of these Fairfly brushes, and you will be very glad you did. So we're going to wrap in just to cover up that wire, but we're not going to make it all the way to the eye here, so we're going to come back just a hair, somewhere in there, right behind your eye, your hook. And just to make sure you have your bucktail, like I said, really all this bucktail is going to do is just hold in the rest of these fibers. We're going to make 2 wraps with this brush. So there's one. There's 2. And just to come across here, we might make one more just to get those legs in the hook here. So 2.5 wraps on this one, 2.5, 3 wraps maybe. And you gotta just be patient with yourself when you're trapping this. Like I said, these are definitely thicker than probably what you're used to as a traditional fly tying brush. So it's gonna take a little bit of practice, but it's really no different. We'll come in with our flush cutters again, just trim this out. And then you want some kind of comb here. We're just gonna pick out these fibers that got trapped in the brush. And that's gonna be the tail of our fly here. And if you get one of these legs trapped, that's no big deal. You just pull it through, get it straightened out, and get it where you want it. And then you can always just take a little kind of guide wrap right over the top here, because we're going to cover this up anyway, just to get everything laying how you want it. That looks pretty good right there. And then for our final material we're going to take an EP minnow head brush, and this is in the Everglades color. And we're going to wrap this up to the head here. A couple more just to be safe. Wraps over this eye. And then we'll take it straight to the eye of the hook. I'm going to use my cheater hackle pliers here. And the first wrap, just make sure you grab these legs and pull them out of the way so you don't trap them. Just hold everything back. And then they should sit nice and pretty. We'll take a couple of wraps behind the eye just to make sure we get a good amount of brush in there. That looks pretty good. And then we'll make 2 or 3 wraps in front of the eye as well, just to kind of get them in the fly. That looks good there. We'll trap that. So 4 or 5 wraps with that EP minnow head brush. You really don't need a lot of that stuff because it is a thicker brush from EP. And we'll get that good and trapped. Pull everything back behind the hook eye. Make a couple of wraps over there, and then you can trim this brush out. And this fly is the mud bug, but it'll work in grass and anywhere else too. So, go ahead and pick out those EP fibers. Watch your legs so you don't stretch those out too bad. But go ahead and pick out those EP fibers. And we're going to pull everything back, and then of course we're going to put a weed guard on here just to make sure we can throw this fly wherever we feel like we need to throw it. If you trap any of those fibers as you're cleaning it up, you can just go in and pull them out with your scissors or with your fingernails. I broke my thread. Nobody panic. Here's a good pro tip. If you break your thread, just start with some wraps right where you broke it at. Cover that up. And pretend like it never happened. Pro tip. And then finally, our last step of material, we're going to use some hard monofilament for our weed guard here. This is 20 pound. You can really use anywhere from 12 up to about probably 30 or 40 if you so choose. But we'll take that piece of hard monofilament, just mash it down with some pliers. Let me get that so you guys can see that here. And we'll just kind of bend it up so we have a place for it to trap on the fly. Get that good and captured. And you can pull all these fibers back just to keep the front of your fly decently clean anyway. And then I'm going to take about a half a dozen wraps behind the weed guard just to prop it up in front of the hook. And then you can trim that to, I like to pull the weed guard back and trim it just above the point of the hook there. We'll whip finish. You should get your whip finish good and tight. Last thing we want to do is, just to kind of make sure this fly lands flat and stays flat, especially if you got some crawling fish or some slow moving fish and you want that thing to sit down on the bottom, is I'm going to trim this bottom hair fairly flat. Just give it a normal EP flies haircut here. Just come through any fibers, especially with this EP and this fair flies brush. If it makes you mad now, it's going to make you mad on the water. You might as well just trim it out now. So I'll just give that just a little haircut just to give us this little shrimpy crustacean kind of taper. And then with this fly, especially, some of this brush after you comb it out has a tendency to get really long. It didn't really happen here, but just to be sure, I'll just kind of wiggle these fibers in. And again, if there's any kind of wayward fibers, just trim a little bit out of that tail there. Don't get too crazy with the haircut because you can sit here for 30 minutes if you wanted to. You guys are ready go throw the mud butt.